Hello and welcome to today's YouTube video. I'm going to do something a bit more instructional today, and I'm planning on doing a bit more instructional videos. So yeah, stay tuned for that. But today we are doing Puzzle Rush, and I'm going to be showing you how to get to 30 in Survival Puzzle Rush. So I'm going to basically explain the ideas that I'm thinking through and also very common themes that you might see in your Survival Puzzle Rush as well. So let's get started. For the first 10 or so, they're just going to be very simple mates. For example, this one is just a very simple mate. This covers any escape squares, and he's also covered by his pawn. So this is just a very common back rank checkmate. And here's another very common checkmate, and it's along the rank of it's along the theme of back rank checkmate as well. There's 3 pawns in front of the king. This one is protected since it's our pawn, so it needs to be protected. But we can take a free rook, and that also happens to be checkmate. Here's another very common checkmate. Some of you may know this after sacrificing maybe your queen onto g1 for smothered checkmate, and this is a very similar position. So you may notice that the king is surrounded by all of its pieces, so it has no escape squares, and the knight can give a check, so it is checkmate. And again, since we're in the first 10, it's going to be very similar ideas. This is another back rank mate. The pawn is covering this square, the king and the pawn are covering this square, and the king is covering this square. So there's a wall in front of the king here, so you can just give a back rank checkmate with the rook. And again, here's another back rank checkmate. It's a big surprise. If you're doing Puzzle Rush, please make sure you know what back rank checkmate is. But yeah, all the squares in front of the king are covered. The pawn doesn't cover that square, but it's blocked by his own pawn. And you can move a rook, and nothing is defending. So it is back rank checkmate. Here's another decently common checkmate. Basically, sometimes you just want to count the squares around the king and what's covered and what's not, and that'll lead you to see if there's checkmate or not. Here, if you do that method, you can see the bishop covers these 2 squares, the rook covers these squares, including the one that the bishop also covers. So that's a very big idea. Let me do Alt highlight that square as double covered. This is covered by the king, so that's covered. These 2 are blocked by its own pieces, and then this square is covered by 3. I'm not going to double highlight since it's not particularly important, but notice how this double covered square, you can move a rook there, and all other squares for the king are covered. Therefore, it must be checkmate. Here's another very common checkmate. It is in the first 10, so these are going to be very simple, but I want to make sure I get the point across. So notice here that the pawn in front of the king is attacked by the bishop and the queen. So double highlight, and let's see, there's nothing protecting it. And when you put your queen straight in front of the king like this, and there's nothing protecting the square, and it's on the edge of the board, it is checkmate, and it's a very common pattern. So make sure you know that pattern as well. Okay, this is another very common checkmate. You'll see this actually very commonly in the Scholar's checkmate, which is probably the most popular. I don't really know what to call it, trendy for beginners opening. But you'll see this kind of checkmate very common, and it's due to the f7 square being very weak. So let's just check all the squares that are covered by my pieces. Let's see, so knight and the queen both cover the square, so I'm going to double highlight it. It's blue now, and if I move my queen to that square, these 2 squares are blocked, and I'll be covered anyways, but the king's escape square is blocked. So notice how all these squares will now be covered once my queen moves to f7, and the square is also unprotected besides the king, so therefore it is checkmate. Okay, this is just the same idea, just in reverse. It's literally basically the exact same puzzle, so I'm not going to explain. just double covered checkmate. I just explained it, no biggie. This is fairly common. I wouldn't say I see it too many times in my games. I would call this actually similar to the fool's checkmate, if you know what that is. If you play f3 and g4 on the first two moves as white, you can get checkmated in two moves, which is why it's called the fool's checkmate, because no sane person would play like that, except for I think Hikaru did like a speed run or something where he did that for a while, and it was a little bit entertaining. But yeah, I would call this very similar to the fool's checkmate, because you can get a queen check on h4, and it just happens to be similar to that. So you're kind of combining fool's checkmate and the scholar's checkmate at the same time, since your bishop and queen come to deliver checkmate against the king on the f-file. And finally, we are gone from checkmates. Although it's possible that this may lead to checkmate. But immediately here, I am thinking check. And how that come to me, I'll explain it a bit. But your first question may be, why don't I give knight to f6 check? That looks like it probably leads to checkmate. There's a very concrete reason why. After knight to f6 check, you can take with the bishop, and I can't take the rook, because in this position, the bishop covers the rook, so now it is protected. And I cannot take the bishop because my queen is hit by the rook. So knight check is a big mistake here. And the reason why I'm drawn to knight to e7 check is because nothing can take it, first of all. It's a check, so I'm discovering the rook, and I'm noticing that nothing can come to protect that rook once I give the check. So the king can't, let's say, move close enough to the rook to protect it for some reason. So that's why if knight to e7, first of all, if king to e8 is just checkmate, I think it's actually just forced checkmate anyways, but I'm just going to play it. I don't think there's too much more explaining to do. So check, and this happens to be checkmate as well. Alright, our first endgame puzzle. Very fitting since we are on 11. So, yeah. First thing I'm thinking of here is getting pawns farther away from the enemy king. That's generally a good thing to do in endgames, especially with king and pawn endgames. You generally want your passed pawns to be far, far away from the enemy king, so you can promote with more ease. And that's the case here. I don't even really have to calculate too much. If I was playing on my own, I would probably play this move instantly. I am very, very strongly thinking of g takes h4, because if I do anything else, since this is a check, first of all, the only other basically logical move is king takes. But the reason I don't think that you should take with your king is because if I take with my king, my pawn is still on the third rank, and I have to spend another move to push it forward. But if I take the pawn, now it's already on the fourth rank. I don't have to invest another move. It's closer to promotion. It's farther away from the king. There's just so many reasons why I should take with the pawn here that I'm not really going to explain. And usually in these kinds of puzzles, you kind of just basically just push the entire puzzle. Not very complex. So that is what we are going to do. All right, and our first puzzle that seems a little bit different, at least. First thing I'm thinking of is just to take, and I think that is the solution. And the reason why is you just need to calculate a little bit deep, which is very good to do in puzzles. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to calculate. But oftentimes you can just rely on pattern recognition after you've done puzzles for a while. Obviously you can't do that if you're starting out, so if you can't just pattern recognize, it's fine. Just focus on calculation, trying to get as many right as you can. So first thing I'm thinking of, obviously, bishop takes e6, and the reason why is it is a check. The pawn is not even attacking my bishop, by the way, because it is pinned to the rook. But the reason I want to take anyways is after bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. If bishop blocks, then I take the knight, because that cuts off the circulation of the queen to the knight. And also if I take, and and queen takes, then there's, queen blocks, there is a free rook in the corner. So by that logic, there is at least a free piece here. So I am just going to go through with my calculation, and lo and behold, you won a piece. Here, I think it is checkmate. Hold on. Pause and figure out the checkmate if you want, but it's not very complex here. It's actually, I'd say, more common than you may think in your games. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's a very obvious check here. Very obvious. So just calculate a little bit deeper. After queen takes c3, there is one legal move for white, and it is to move the king over. And you have maybe a tricky move to see for beginners, but you have rook sliding over to b8 check. And the only legal move is knight back to b2. And in that position, you have a couple choices, but I think the most accurate choice is queen takes b2, checkmate. I'll show you a bit closer when we get to that point, but it's a very common mating pattern. So yeah, check. Queen blocks because of desperation. Usually puzzles do that, and you just take it. It doesn't let me to do the checkmate, but it was a very common mating pattern, so don't worry about it too much, as long as you know why it is checkmate. Here I'm just thinking queen check, and the reason I'm doing this is because I noticed that if I give this check, the rook is only defended once by the king, and once I give this check, my queen will x-ray the rook, so I will have two attackers and the king will be the only defender. So I'm just going to play this without too much more thought, since I know that it is correct. And you may say, but he can just block with the bishop. I forgot to address this, my bad. But the reason why this is still correct is because I have the deflection tactic, or you may call it attraction too. It's deflection and attraction at the same time, which seems a bit counterintuitive, but okay. And what deflection tactics are you want to draw the king away from a piece or towards a square, and that is the case here. The king is the only defender of the bishop and is the only defender of the rook. This is actually, funny enough, it's also overloading, another tactical theme that you need to be aware of. Overloading is when one piece is defending too many pieces for itself to handle. So if you take one, then another piece that it was defending will now be undefended. That's a very common theme for overloading. So yeah, I'm just going to play it out. We're attracting the king away from the rook, and since it was overloaded, now it is no longer defending the bishop. So we will take the bishop. Okay, this may be a bit hard to see, but I'm just going to explain my thought process. My first thought was actually queen to c3, but looking at it a bit more closely, that's wrong since the knight's hanging. The reason I thought queen c3 is because I'm threatening checkmate on b4, and I don't really see a way to stop it. The solution might be queen c3, but I just need to calculate this a little bit deeper. It could also be queen to c2 check, which actually, now that I'm looking at it, is forced checkmate. But yeah, I'll explain why. The reason why I was looking at queen c3 is because, I don't know, sometimes with puzzles there's these weird quiet moves to give checkmate, but after looking closely you want to look for the most forcing moves, and the most forcing move you can make in chess is a check. So I should have looked for that first, it's my bad. And I'll just calculate together a little bit. It's not that difficult, but try and visualize. Queen to c2 check. It cannot go to this square, it cannot go to this square, and it cannot go to this square, and these are covered. I don't need to do that one, I don't need to do that one. So therefore, by process of elimination, the king has to go to a3, and now we go back to our original idea, queen to c3. Let's imagine the queen on c3 and the king on a3. It cannot go forward, so it must go back to its original square. And this is actually quite funny. If you imagine this puzzle starting your queen on c3 it's very obvious what the solution is, but that's essentially the ending of the puzzle. If you start with your queen on c3, you want to play queen to b4 checkmate. So I will play check, check, and it doesn't let me checkmate, but hopefully you can see why it was checkmate in that position. All right, the first idea I'm thinking of is rook to d2. It's just very common to double up on the second rank, and usually it is very good to do that. I don't actually see anything else, funnily enough. I don't really know how to explain how I came to this conclusion, other than I want to checkmate the king, and the only logical way to do that, in my opinion here, is to play rook to d2, and you are hitting this pawn twice with two heavy pieces, and it is impossible to defend. And the reason I know it's impossible to defend is because the rook can't defend, because then I just take it with my rook, and it is only defended by the king, so it's a free rook. And the queen can't come back anywhere to a safe square. It can't like go in front over here. The knight can't defend in any weird ways. Yeah, I mean, you can just do passive elimination there, but yeah, I'm just gonna go through with it. Of course, he just tries to block. I'm assuming he will sacrifice the queen here, but yeah. Usually in those kinds of positions where you're just threatening checkmate, you get major amount of material, or you checkmate. Either one is fine. If you can't win up like a full queen, then I can't really fix that in a Puzzle Rush video, but just make sure you know how to do that at least. Make sure you see those tactics so you can get that big advantage, and you'll learn how to convert that advantage over time, so don't worry about it too much right now. And by the way, this is just a simple checkmate in one. I would actually call this similar to back rank checkmate, oddly enough. So just think as this rook as creating a wall. So pretend the rook is on the back, the rook is the back rank essentially. It's creating the back rank. And just pretend this square is protected by a bishop, and it actually comes very naturally to you, and you will come to the conclusion of rook to h3 checkmate. If you want to pause the video and check all the squares around the king right now, please do so. But yeah, I'm just going to play checkmate, and we're at 18. In this position, I think I came to the conclusion of checkmate. Obviously, first thing, I'm looking at checking with the queen. Queen's the most powerful piece. You want to get it close to the king. Usually that's the first piece you want to check for checks against the king. But don't take that advice to heart, because sometimes it's actually the other way around and you want to bring other pieces closer. So I don't know why particularly I chose the queen to look at first, but it's just sometimes hard to put into words. So just some quick calculation here. Queen to g5. The only legal move for black in this position is now king to h8. And you have a very nice check there. Queen to f6. Again, the only legal move is back to g8. And now you can do the old switcheroo and play rook to g5. And that happens to be checkmate. Check, check, and checkmate on the next move, which didn't allow me to play. And hey, look, it's the very, very common knight and rook checkmate. You want to know this pattern. I've had this a few times in games. I can't really say it's all that common, but it's still a nice pattern to know. Checkmate patterns are all very nice to know, since they'll randomly occur, so you never know when you'll need it. But this one is very common in Puzzle Rush. So notice the squares around the king. It's very easy to checkmate when the king is in the corner. The knight is covering these two squares, and the rook is covering this square. So if you keep the rook on the 7th rank, then if you give a check, it'll be checkmate. So coming to that conclusion, let's see here. Blue, blue, it is double covered, so it is checkmate. All right, so just some quick calculation here. Again, I go through checks first. That's what you're supposed to do. Checks captures of checks. Look that term up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, queen check. I'm just do some quick calculation here. This is appearing to be checkmate. we're winning some material. So check, the only available move is king up, and then you have a knight check on g5, and the king is forced up again. And of course, now you have another check with queen to h8, but your knight is hanging. So in that position, you have, what do you have? I'm actually quite confused. I'm trying to like calculate on the fly, but I'm actually trying to figure out the solution here. So check, up, ah, you have check and then mate. Okay, that's interesting. So check, king up, check, king up again, and it's actually a little bit common to create like a back rank checkmate pattern with your knight, especially in puzzles. Oftentimes you do it with a rook sacrifice on the h7 square, which we may see later on. I'll show you if we come to that. But I'm just going to play it, and hopefully seeing it on the board helps better show you what I mean. So after knight check, king up, if I give this check, these squares will be covered. If it goes up, it's checkmate, since this square is also covered by the pawn. And if the king goes back, then I am covered on this square with the knight and the queen, and it is similar to a back rank checkmate. And of course, here he chose the hard one to visualize, but the square is covered by the knight, the square is covered by the pawn, and the square is covered by its own piece. So it's very similar to a back rank checkmate. Okay. So here, my first thought is queen to g8, since it is a battery. But calculate king to g6. I need to calculate bishop f7 check, king to g5, queen takes g7. Only move. Is that checkmate? I believe that is checkmate. So there's not really a pattern here. I kind of just had to calculate checkmate. I don't know if this is a common pattern or not. I doubt it. I don't think I've ever seen this in my games, or not that I can remember at least. So just do some quick calculation here. You'll notice you have a battery. So another common theme is a battery. Plus it's like the only real logical check here. You don't have this check, it's covered by the bishop. If I can draw the arrow, it's covered by the bishop. So logically the only check you have is queen to g8. And I already calculated this, so I'm just going to play it now. And it doesn't even let me show you. But there was a very pretty checkmate there. This is actually a very common theme. So you actually want to be aware of this in your games. Pushing the f-pawn, especially when the king is not castled, is something you should never do. Never do this in an actual chess game. Do not push your f-pawn if you're not castled. It is very weakening to the king, and that is actually proven fatal here to white, due to a very common tactic, especially in Puzzle Rush. This is so common. I see this like every Puzzle Rush. You should definitely know this pattern. And I'm just going to calculate it real quick and try and visualize with me. If check, if he moves his king, then it is checkmate, so he's not going to do that. So queen to h4, and he blocks with g3, or I guess he can block with the knight as well, but it falls to the same tactic, which is knight takes g3, and after pawn takes, the rook is hanging, so anything on g3 doesn't actually protect anything, and it is hanging to the knight. So being the knight and the queen will be covering that square, and this pawn is pinned, you can go through with the tactic queen to h4 check, and knight takes g3. And of course, I don't think someone in an actual game would take that. They would just deal with losing a piece rather than losing a rook. But puzzles are just like that sometimes. Okay, this is an odd puzzle, but I think we are winning. So first thing I'm thinking of is obviously taking. So if pawn takes, king takes, now we move king over. And now if king comes back, what do we do? I think we have king to f7 because he can no longer protect the pawn. So he has to go king to f4. So king on f4, king on f7, just to visualize that. King takes f6, king takes f3, king takes g5, and now we protect our own pawn with the king, and we will be able to push that to promotion. If you don't understand why, hopefully I'll be able to show you in this puzzle. So I'm just going to play it out. And of course now he chooses, but I think we go to this square anyways. And the reason I think we should go to g6 anyways is because after king to g6, if he takes, we take, and we are hitting the pawn. And he has king to f4. But in that position, we have a very, very common theme with pawns facing each other. We have a king to h5, and the opponent is in Zugzwang, and we will be able to win his pawn by force. Zugzwang, by the way, is a term in chess. It's basically when you're forced your opponent to make a bad move or a losing move. So king to g6, my first thoughts. I believe anything else is losing here, so g6, and okay, he didn't choose the more tricky, I would say, line. At least fighting for a chance. In this position, he's not really even fighting for a chance. But I was talking about king on f4 here. And in that position, I would have king to h5. And notice in that position, he does not have any moves to protect his pawn. So I can take his pawn on the next move, and my king will still be protecting my own g4 pawn. So my opponent chose king to e6, trying to defend the promotion square. But that just doesn't work since I will still have king opposition. And if you don't know what that is, just look it up. It's a very common theme. And we actually looked at this theme earlier. I said it was a common theme. Notice how pushing the f-pawn, he is not castled. The knight covers this g6 square. And notice we also have a queen check, pinning the h-pawn. So this is just, I know what the solution is. It's a very common pattern, especially in Puzzle Rush. So I'm just going to play it without further explanation. Knight takes, and queen takes rook. Okay. I think this is actually a little more complicated, but I do think it's a pretty solution. I think you sacrifice your queen to take the rook, and I'll try to explain more how I came to that conclusion. And the reason I came to that conclusion, now that I've had a little bit more time to think about it, is queen takes a1, which forces the rook to come over, and that moved away from me giving a check, which will come in handy. So queen takes a1, rook takes a1, and now I have rook b1 check, which is very important. If he takes my rook back, then I take with the pawn, and it is pawn with check. And if he doesn't take, for example, king up, then I promote. And if rook takes, then queen takes. And if queen takes queen, then I have rook takes queen. And is that actually winning? Hold on. Takes, check, up. Oh, I just take the rook, because if I promote, he has X-ray defense. If I promote, he has extra defense with queen and rook looking at the same square through my own rook. So he has two attackers and I only have one defender. So it's a queen for a queen. So you take the queen, rook takes, and rook takes, which hopefully will allow me to see, but I'm just going to go through with it since I know the solution. Yeah, he did choose the tricky line. And I'm going to show you here more since you may have difficulty visualizing, and that's okay. But if I promote here, then I will have a queen on c1, and he will have the queen protecting the c1 square and also the rook protecting the c1 square. So after promotes, he has queen takes queen, rook takes queen, and rook takes rook. And in that position, he has a rook and a bishop, and we have a knight and a bishop. So he is technically winning. But in this position, we have rook takes a1, it is hanging, and my pawn is still protected, so I will be able to promote it next turn. Alright. This is just a very common theme. I don't know why we're getting this theme this late on, but this is a back ring checkmate, surprisingly enough. If you look here, the king is in the corner, and his two frontal escape squares are covered, one by the knight and one by its own pawn. So with that observation, I can take the rook, which will force his rook to take back, unless he wants to get checkmated with the queen. And then I have rook to e1 check, and the rook will be forced back, and then we will be able to take it. Yep, and just look at it again. It is back ring checkmate if I take the rook, so we're going to play it. Okay, so there's a couple things you have to calculate here, but I think the most forcing line is the correct one. So rook c1 check, king's only move is to h2, then I have bishop to e5 check, and after king h3 there's a checkmate, so the only move is check, up, check, g3, but in that position I think I have d3, and that opens up my bishop. Looking at this, just making sure he does have a check in that position though, with rook to d8, and that will win my bishop. So let me think about this again. Check, king up, check, pawn. Trying to think. That's interesting. I'm not actually sure what to do. So rook c1 check, king to h2. Bishop to e4. He has to play g3. I mean, my first instinct is just e3, but in this position, I think he has this check. And I think my thought is correct, and that I'll just win my bishop. But if he takes my bishop, then I have e2, and I'm actually promoting. So maybe my first thought was correct. I'm actually going to go through with it. I may be incorrect, but you have 3 wrong puzzles that you can do and still get to 30. So you can still get 2 wrong, for example, and still reach 30, and then I don't get the 31st one wrong. But I think my first thought is right here, and I'm just thinking of most forcing lines, and I'm also trying to think along the thoughts of checkmate, since usually that forces your opponent's hand. But I'm just going to go for the line that I thought was correct. So rook check, bishop check, and the reason I see e3 is because there's a very common checkmating pattern here with bishop and rook when the king is in this position with these weird like fianchetto pawns is a good example when this happens, but usually it's associated with h3 as well. But yeah, I think my solution is correct, because after e3, rook d8 check, king to g7, rook takes a8, I have e2 in that position, and I am promoting on e1. So I'm going to go over that line. It may be incorrect, but I think it is correct. Okay, we were correct, so very nice. So I'm thinking along the thoughts of knight to e4, and I'm trying to find checkmate. So just keep that in mind as we go through this puzzle. So let's calculate knight to e4. Knight checks are the hardest checks to calculate in my opinion. So you kind of just have to brute force it sometimes. So these squares are covered pause and figure out why if you don't know why. But all these squares are covered. So by that process, the king only has one move to go. So knight to e4 check, king to d3. And in that position, I can win the rook with a fork or a double attack. They are synonymous in my mind. But after knight to e4 check, king to d3, I have knight c5 check, forking the king and forking the rook. Or I shouldn't say forking the king and the rook at the same time. I don't really know how to explain this other than simple pattern recognition. I looked at rook to d2 first, and this one was just a little more difficult to see. Backwards knight moves are sometimes difficult to see, but just try and calculate a little bit deeper if you didn't see that, and try and look at all possible moves, since of course I didn't even see this right away, so why should you? So I'm just going to play it since I know it's the solution. Okay, so my opponent is threatening checkmate very obviously. So I need to go for a forcing line here, and surprisingly enough, I think there is a back rank checkmate. I know this sounds silly, but in this position there is actually a back rank checkmate. And you're like, what? The rook's here. What are you talking about? Are you crazy? There's a few observations you can make here. Your rooks are doubled, so this square is not actually protected by the queen. It is attacked twice. Keep that in mind. And now the second thing you need to observe is the bishop and the queen look at the square. And it's also a pinned square, so this pawn can't move, and any piece that's actually placed on the square would be pinned to the king. So putting those two thoughts together, which is something you need to do very often, especially in tactics, is queen f7 check. It's important that you take with the queen. If you take with the bishop, the king can just move and it's completely fine. But if you take with the queen, if the king moves, then queen takes f8 is checkmate. So if you take with the queen, rook takes is now pinned, and now it is back rank checkmate with rook e8, queen takes e8, rook takes e8. So we figured out a solution, so let's go through. And it lets me do the back rank checkmate. So yeah. Observe now why it is back rank checkmate. I'm not crazy, but yeah, it's back rank checkmate, and it is also our final puzzle. We are now at puzzle number 30, which means I will wrap up today's video. And if you want to see more of this type of content, let me know. I'll be glad to do like how to get to 40 in puzzles, or like how to get your puzzle rating to a certain rating. I'm okay with doing all these kinds of videos. Just let me know down in the comments, and make sure you like the video if you like this content. But yeah, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in tomorrow's video.